When Daniel and Pamela Dunn went in for a prenatal ultrasound, they got great news. Twins. Followed by terrible news. The babies were experiencing a twin-to-twin transfusion, which could prove fatal for both boys. The babies were due in March, and in November, at just 24 weeks, Jerem and Jared Dunn were born.
Jerem weighed 15 ounces and was 10 and a half inches long. So I tell people he weighed less than a pound of butter and shorter than a sheet of paper. And his brother was about 2 inches longer. So being born that premature, their eyes aren't developed, their hearing's not developed, their brain's not fully developed. But, when we were primary children's, we saw many miracles.
The twins spent the next 6 months in the hospital before they were eventually healthy enough to come home. But with everything the Dunns had to worry about during that hospital stay, there was one big burden lifted. They didn't have to pay a cent, in part because of an annual charity event called Festival of Trees. Fast forward 22 years. Those twins are thriving, and the Festival of Trees is still a big part of the Dunn family culture. But now they're on the giving end rather than the receiving end. Welcome to the Why Magazine podcast, bringing you ideas, stories, and voices from Brigham Young University. My name is Whitney Singley Archibald, and today I'm excited to bring you 3 stories of BYU alumni who are going forth to serve in 3 very different ways. We'll continue the story of the Dunn family and how they've given back to other families in need of medical care. Then we'll talk to Ben and Heather Payne about their crusade to help foster children thrive. And we'll end with the story of Val Farmer, who's lived up to his name in a career devoted to improving mental health in agricultural communities. These are just 3 of many stories of alumni service that we feature in the Going Forth section in every issue of Why Magazine. It's so exciting to think of so many thousands of alumni spread out all over the globe, each using their unique circumstances and talents to live up to BYU's motto, Enter to learn, go forth to serve. We'd love to hear about the ways you or other BYU alumni you know are spreading goodness throughout the world. If you know a BYU alum who's making the world a better place through their service, please let us know by sending an email to alumninews@byu.edu, which we'll include in the show notes. And now, let's get back to Daniel and Pamela Dunn. Their twins, Jerem and Jared, were born in November 2002, and Daniel and Pamela were juggling time at the hospital and time with their 5 daughters at home. One day, as they were taking the elevator at the Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City, they saw a flyer for the Festival of Trees, an annual charity event where families and organizations donate beautifully decorated Christmas trees along with other things like quilts and playhouses to be auctioned off for the Primary Children's Hospital. Many of those donations are from families whose children have been patients at the hospital. That year, the Dunns decided to attend the festival. Here's Pamela.
And I just felt so much peace and love walking in there. The spirit in there was just incredible, just really healing and hearing the stories. There's, some children who didn't make it and some that did, but it was just so inspiring and just brought such comfort to us.
2 years later, the Dunns decided to donate a tree of their own to the festival, and a tradition was born.
I just felt like it was something that we could do, that was one way that we could give back to primary children's for the great care that we got. And it really wasn't anything elaborate, our tree. My family got involved with us, and so with my brothers and sisters and parents, we just put together a tree and just made us feel so good, and just like we are doing something to help give another family the blessings that we received.
We're able to put their pictures up, and often would do a picture of them when they were first born, and they're so tiny and they're next to the dollar bill, and they're barely longer than the dollar bill, and then we'd do a picture of them how they are now. And on the back of the card, you can write the story of them. And so we had a story we'd write of them about how we just saw so many miracles. And so giving hope to people, I think, was part of the reason we did it too,
Year after year, the Dunns continued donating trees for the festival, each decorated with a different theme. Then one year, they decided to go a little bit bigger, and they donated a large nativity scene. In 2014, a friend who was in charge of the Playhouse area asked if they'd be willing to donate a playhouse that year. The Dunns took on the challenge and started building playhouses each year with their kids, again with fun themes like a pirate ship, a jail and sheriff's office, and a fairy tale treehouse. They'd brainstorm ideas with their kids and work together to build them. including Jerem and Jared, the two boys who started the family tradition in the first place.
I think this is really how we start Christmas and how they feel like Christmas starts.
Yeah, it really is the beginning. And we often start in June thinking about it and getting ideas, but it is really the best part of Christmas for us as a family. And now that our kids are growing and moving away, they really miss that.
We do have one daughter that has two little boys that lives close by, and 2 years ago when we were doing the ship, did come over and help us quite often. And
so, yeah, it's going into the next generation now.
Such a fun and meaningful family tradition. The Festival of Trees has been going for 53 years and has raised more than $40 million, all of which goes to help patients of Primary Children's Hospital and their families. Our next story of service is about Ben and Heather Payne, a couple who has brought hope to thousands of foster children in Northern California. Their story began in Provo, where they met while working at the state hospital, Heather as a nurse and Ben in the ER doing crisis counseling. Their dating strategy was definitely unconventional, but a perfect fit for them.
We would frequently take kids from the children's unit on dates with us.
We took them off site to go pick up trash. They'd go skiing, they'd go swimming or to the movies. And I would invite Ben to come with me. And anyhow, so that's just something that I really enjoyed doing.
That's what caused me to fall in love with her. I saw what a big heart she had for these kids that had been abused and neglected, and just really felt great love for her because of the great love she had for the kids and those less fortunate.
This laid the foundation for the rest of their life together, helping children in difficult circumstances. Ben graduated from BYU in 1983 with a degree in pre-professional marriage and family counseling, and then went on to become a licensed therapist with his own practice in Northern California. When the management company of a group home Ben worked with asked him if he would consider opening a foster agency, Ben was hesitant, but with encouragement from Heather, said he'd do it.
I told the people at their persistence that I would do it until they could find somebody else. And Heather got involved, and Heather's very well connected with friends and people in the community, and she recruited foster parents. And it was a really cool experience for us to get a call on the weekend or in the middle of the night for children, a sibling group perhaps, and then to place them in somebody's home and take them to the home where they had everything ready for them, a bed, a bedroom, and everything else, to recognize that this was actually a pretty heroic thing for someone kind of sight unseen to take in somebody else's kids and really give them a safe haven.
And just a couple of years before that, we had family that lived in Northern California from Hawaii, and they began to have some struggles, and we got a call in the middle of the night saying, hey, your second cousins don't have a place to be. So we got certified as just a family placement. So we were actually foster parents before we started Children's Hope. And it gave us a little bit of insight to that system. And I knew that there was such a huge need. There was a huge lack of homes. Many kids got placed, far away. Definitely not in their same school or with their same, infrastructure and support.
Oh, that's hard.
And so I just, without major thought, it just burst right out of me that I knew that we needed to be doing this together. And it was definitely the sweet spot in our life.
So the Paynes moved forward with their agency, which they appropriately named Children's Hope.
All these people just were right there in the right spot, and we all just did our part. And it all somewhat came together and has moved forward. And I've always loved the name of Children's Hope. I just feel like that says so much for what we are trying to do with Heavenly Father's help.
Children's Hope has a great team of social workers and other staff, many of whom also went to BYU. They work with the local community to recruit and provide resources for foster parents and to place children in their homes.
One of the kids just came into a home for the very first time. He had his bag full of what clothes he could bring. And he just stood there in kind of the entry. And he just said, so this is what a real home feels like. And it's just something that he just felt immediately that there was something very different being in that home. A 10-and-a-half-year-old boy had been in one of our homes for about a week and a half, and I bumped into him and I said, "Hey, how is it in your home?" And he said, "It's great." And I said, "Well, what do you like about it?" He said, "We get to eat 3 meals a day." And then he said, "Do all of your homes feed their kids 3 meals a day?" He just felt like he hit the jackpot. But that was at the most basic level that he just felt like, oh, this was going to be good. This was going to be very different from the life that he had experienced.
Children's Hope also provides individual and group counseling, foster care services like home visits, training for foster families, and even clothing, supplies, and toys for Christmas and birthdays. Once the kids turn 18, the agency arranges for transitional housing, plus financial classes and other life skills so that they can make it on their own.
Well, we want them to feel like there's a lot of people that will help them and be interested in them. That's actually a big challenge we face once they turn 18. Not just, okay, you have this help going forward, but where are you going to go for Christmas? And who do you celebrate a birthday with? Or if something really wonderful happens, who are you going to call? And if you're having a rough time, who do you confide in and get some help and kind of reset in your life, because they really don't have family to go back to.
Children's Hope really works to develop a rich community of support around each of the kids, and the Paynes continuously see the Lord's hand in their work.
Heavenly Father is in so much in the details of our lives. He is so aware of every child. I've seen it time and time again that, any little thing that a child needs, somehow the right person or the right support or the right services are in place. And there's just little things that people step forward and help, or the right therapy happens for them to help them. They're found and put into foster care. And it's just so much larger than anything that two people could ever do on their own. But for 300 children and the staff that we have and the communities that we have, Heavenly Father sees them and knows them by name. And so it's kind of an honor to have a little bit of a front row seat to see that. Some of them are members of the LDS Church, and they become not only adopted but sealed in the temple. I've sat in many a temple and had a few tears watching that beautiful experience to have them sealed to a family. And others are just with really wonderful, wonderful families. And Heavenly Father has blessed them in that way to live in this beautiful circumstance and to be able to grow up with that love and support. Not easy. It's not that their lives become automatically easy, but He notices the details and the things that they need.
Our last story today comes from Val Farmer, who graduated from BYU in 1965. Despite what his name implies, he didn't study agriculture. He majored in psychology at BYU and then went on to graduate training in psychology. But he did kind of accidentally end up leaning into his name as a pioneer in mental health care for farm and ranch families. After his internship, he took a job at a mental health center in Mitchell, South Dakota, a small rural community.
So we went there not dreaming of ever being in the Midwest or even wanting a career in the Midwest, didn't know anything about rural mental health. It wasn't on my horizon at all.
And he really didn't realize what he was up against. It was the early 80s, and mental health care was not as mainstream as it is today, especially in farming communities. There was a major stigma about seeing a psychologist.
The last people they want to see is someone from their local community, or even have their car recognized, or anything about mental health. And there was a rural mental health crisis going on underneath the surface. In 81, 82, 83, there were farmers facing huge financial problems. There was rioting and protests in Washington, D.C., and things like that. And so the whole idea of farm stress and people losing their place in agriculture was really a big deal.
This was a frustrating position for Val to be in. He knew how much help this community needed, and he knew he had the resources to help them, but he just couldn't seem to reach them. So, with his practice struggling, he moved to Rapid City where he started a rural enhancement program. And he got creative. He had been writing a regular column about rural mental health for a magazine called the Farm Wife News, and he realized that maybe if farm families wouldn't come see him in his office, this was one way he could go to them.
The women in rural America loved my column because they knew it was true, the topics I was bringing up. And if they tried to talk about it in their small rural towns, they would say, well, who are you? Or they would try to discount them in some way. But having the information come from outside of their community, they could say it and they could put it in front of their husbands, say, well, read this, will you? And then they would talk about it and they'd get the issue out in the open, or it would become open discussion among the women in the rural communities. They would start to edge into disclosing more of their own personal lives with each other because it wasn't just them personally having a problem that they weren't supposed to have.
He started writing a regular column in the Rapid City Journal about mental health and the farm crisis. It took off, and his column was syndicated and ran in several newspapers and magazines throughout the Midwest. He also appeared as a regular guest on a radio show and became the president of the National Association for Rural Mental Health. This was catching on.
It drew out conversations that needed to have, and farmers would tend to want to solve it on their own, or they would retreat or be depressed, or they wouldn't try to solve it with their wives. They would try to somehow heroically manage the situation, but they couldn't. And so it was without them having some sort of dialogue with somebody, mental health provider, a family doctor, a best friend, or a spouse. All of that was so important to help men that were struggling with losing their identity or their livelihood or their rural community. Anything they ever valued in life was connected with their immediate surroundings, and to lose their farm meant losing everything to them.
Ultimately, as people became familiar with his work, they started coming more and more to his clinical practice as well. Eventually, Val retired from his practice and passed his column to another trusted industry professional. But he still does some mediation work for multi-generational farm families because he finds it so fulfilling to help farmers. So even though he often says this was an accidental career, he knows that's not quite true.
I really don't believe it was accidental. Well, I can give you a summary of bloom where you're planted. And I bloomed where I was planted. I was planted in a foreign environment, and I learned what people needed, and I went for it.
Thank you for listening to the Y Magazine podcast. You can look for new episodes the first and third Thursdays of each month. If you're enjoying the podcast, share your favorite episode with friends and family. And we'd love to get your feedback in our listener survey. The link is in the show notes. The Y Magazine podcast is produced by me, Whitney Archibald, with executive producer Peter Gardner. Original music mixing and mastering by Jarrett Davis.